newsrooms across the country are debating whether or not reporters should be allowed to be involved as they cover protest. Well, according to the New York Times, Axios allows its reporters to join protest. And in a company memo, the chief executive of politics said he supports staffers' rights to march, adding that the publisher would cover bail for any employees arrested and their medical bills as well. Well, meanwhile, the Daily Beast is reporting on the Business Insider. Apparently, some of its staffers have been donating to organizations that are helping to pay bail for people arrested during the Black Lives Matter protest. The company's global editor-in-chief had to ask staff to consider whether their donation damaged their credibility and the publication's credibility as well. But that's not it. The only place that is being questioned about its objectivity. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is under fire as well, after one of their reporters, Alexis Johnson, her tweet went viral, which said that looting was similar to a Kenny Chesney concert. Wow. Well, now her and other reporters at the Pittsburgh Gazette are getting in trouble and not allowed to cover protest who retweeted that same tweet. Well, the question now is, can papers allow their reporters to be neutral and to protest as well? Let's ask our company Republican strategist Lauren Claffey and the host of WMAL Mornings on the Mall, Mary Walters. Ladies, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, so I'll be interested in your take on this, because when it comes to politics, they all say that they're neutral. They're not. And I kind of have come down to the side that, well, I would rather they're public about it instead of pretending that they're neutral. So in some ways, if they admit what they're interested in, their causes or their politics, then there's some transparency in their reporting, and you can go, okay, now I know where they're coming from. Because I think, especially when they cover politics, they pretend that they're not liberal. That, you know, when we know there are. So in some ways, actually making them come out of their shell, Mary Walter, I think is actually a better solution.
It's adorable to think that they were actually in their shells. They have been so transparent and so out there for a long time now. This has been going on, and you know, companies sponsored rioting, and there's a difference between looting and rioting. If you're arrested, you probably, between protesting and rioting, if you've been arrested and your company needs to pay bail for you, you probably weren't peacefully protesting. That's probably rioting or looting or committing another crime. That's the part that I find troubling about this, is that the company is willing to bail them out after they have been arrested for committing a crime. That's different.
Yeah. Lauren, what do you, I think Mary's making a good point. There's one thing to say if you got wrapped up in a protest peacefully, but it's another thing if you were caught rioting or committing vandalism.
Sure. I mean, there's going to obviously be a difference, and we don't want journalists or anybody committing crimes in which, is hurting the city that they live. But I think going back to the original question about, the bias and, what is expected of journalism today, I think it's really a generational divide that you're seeing in newsrooms. And that's why newsrooms have been grappling with this question for the past couple of years. Honestly, we saw this same question arise during the Women's March, where women journalists were trying to march during the protest and then also cover it. And, it was decided at that time that that should not happen. And I think the same standards need to apply for these protests as well. And if they are going to be marching or protesting or donating or any form of activism that implies bias or support towards the movement, there needs to be complete transparency on this. And I think that's where, we expect that for the most part. If, for example, the Washington Post is covering a story on Amazon, they have to disclose that they are owned by Jeff Bezos. The same thing needs to apply to individual journalists, right? If they have performed some form of activism, they need to disclose or be prohibited from covering that set of issues.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, Lauren, that they should acknowledge it in some way, that people know if they're writing an article on it, that it might be biased. It's not objective like normal journalists are. But Mary, this brings about the question, should they be allowed at all to report on that, or should there be a divide? You can go participate in these things, but then you can't write on it because you can't be clearly objective, or might not be able to be objective.
In an ideal world, absolutely. But I think Lauren's 100% right. We've lost any veneer of journalism. They're not journalists, they're activists. And it is a generational divide. The under 40 crowd are the safetyists. Anything that makes them feel unsafe is something that challenges their feelings or their worldview. And for them, these protests are a way of life. So it comes out in their quote unquote reporting, which is really just opinion and activism. And the companies have to decide, are we going to side with the safetyists, the under 40 crowd, or are we going to side with the over 40 crowd that's biased, but at least has a sense of some kind of objectivity or disclosure, to Lauren's point, which I think is a great one, to put right in the byline. You know, Sue Smith is covering this protest, but she also marched in it at the same time. I think that's necessary because the average reader, that's all they're going to see. They don't know the ins and outs and their activism behind the scenes.
Yeah, Lauren, I mean, the question is, you brought up the Women's March, which is interesting. Now we're seeing this. Do you think that this is a slippery slope where we now start to see journalists go out there and advocate for, against the, gun ownership and all other things? Are we getting to a point where they're going to now get into all sorts of issues? Or do you think this is a unique case?
This has already been a slope that we've seen. I mean, this has been, again, I referenced the Women's March, but I think you also saw this. And granted, she was a student. She's still learning and new in journalism. But the same thing happened with Parkland students and the gun, you mentioned gun rights with a gun rights protest. They also, she went on CNN and said point blank that she believes that journalism is activism. And so there is sort of a generational divide here, I think, on the view of what journalism is and what the standards are that journalists need to adhere to. And, the Associated Press, the New York Times, they all have very strict ethical guidelines. The New York Times is not allowing their employees to participate in any way with the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, any of those things. And that's been longstanding newsroom standard for them.
Yeah.
However,
but they definitely got involved in that op-ed the other day with Tom Cotton, and they're making their voices known in a lot of different ways. So, but I think the generational divide that you brought up is a fascinating subject. It's so true. There's a big difference between how older reporters handle this and how younger. So anyway, I hope we can continue this conversation in the next couple of months. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, coming up, Michael Flynn's lawyers are back in court, and this time asking the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to force Judge Emmett Sullivan to drop his case. And guess what? Democrats don't like it. No shocker. We'll break it all down with the president of the Center for Security Policy next.